So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wojciech Szczerba. I work as a rector, president of Ewangelical School of Theology in Wrocław, Poland. And in our ecumenical work, we refer to faith and theology in a very contextual way. We try to deal with questions and challenges which we all face in our today's world, in our crazy, complicated world. So what does it mean to be a person of faith in the 21st century? What does it mean to be a Christian in the time of pandemic? So with today's event, we are inaugurating a series of conversations with really interesting people, which is entitled Christianity in the Age of Anxiety. So let me introduce our special guest today. It's Dr. Reverend Christopher Edmonston, the senior pastor of White Memorial Presbyterian Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. Is that right?
Yes.
That's right. Yeah, Reverend Edmonston is an excellent, very active preacher in many places of the world, including Poland. He writes, he blogs, he is very involved in many social issues. In 2018, Dr. Edmonston received an Associated Church Press Award of Excellence for an article, Pastoring a Purple Church. And Dr. Edmonston has served in several boards and organizations. Among them, there is Union Presbyterian Seminary and also the Presbyterian Outlook. And Pastor Christopher is an excellent writer, great preacher, deep thinker, and above all, a very good friend. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation. It's quite a brave step.
Well, thank you, my friend. The friendship goes both ways. And I'm grateful that you are a part of my life, and your introduction was very kind. Thank you.
Thank you. Christopher, I have a very simple question to you. And I think really you can help me and help us, our Polish public, our students, to understand what is going on in the world from your perspective. So the simple question is, what does the pandemic mean to you personally? How did it change your life in the last few months?
I don't know. There is nothing simple about the pandemic. It has changed everything about the way I work. It has changed my children. They stopped going to school, like many places. My son is supposed to finish secondary school here in the United States this year. And there are no big graduation ceremonies, no big celebrations. Everything is very small. It's changed everything at my church. We no longer have any activities on campus. We only have online activities, online worship, online Bible studies, online fellowship activities. We've had to rethink how we support agencies that feed the hungry or house the homeless because they can't get together in big groups. So we've had to rethink how we partner with our friends that are helping those in our city who are in great financial need. And I think in general, in terms of ministry, it's changed everything in that everyone is anxious. Everyone is a little afraid that the economy won't recover, or that they will get the virus, or that school won't start in the fall again for children or for college students. So the short answer is the pandemic has touched every part of every person's life. The people who are sick and in the hospital, of course, are dealing with the most, but everyone has been changed and touched. For me personally, it means having to rethink how I live and how I work at my church every day.
Wow. You're a pastor. It's a wonderful job, ministry, hobby, blessing, curse. Well, there are many descriptions, but I guess it requires some kind of prophetic wisdom. And I have to tell you, here in Poland, we're really tired of lockdowns and restrictions and not being free and all these limitations. What do you think? How the world will look like after the pandemic is gone?
I think two things. Number one, I think people have a longing to return to what feels normal because normal feels safe. And so I think some people, as soon as the lockdowns were eased or were lessened, they ran right back out and started doing everything they had wanted to do, going to the beach, going to events as if they were allowed. And so a lot of people, because normal is less anxious, because what their normal life is what they miss, they go back very quickly. And then other people will take the time, maybe they've been able to read more or meditate more or pray more or slow the pace of their life down. In the United States, our lives tend to be very busy, very full of things, moving very fast. And a lot of people have enjoyed the slowdown. And so I think some people after the pandemic will continue some of those new practices, meditation, prayer, reading, journaling. I also think there will be other people who, because the pandemic has taken away their business, there are many restaurants, many places to eat in the United States that will never open again. And so many of those people will have to rethink every part of their lives when the pandemic is over. And in that way, I think the changes the pandemic has forced upon us might be lasting. There will be some, I think, that people go back to very quickly, and it won't change much at all once it's over. Children's sports teams, there are no children's teams here. Public recreation, gymnasiums, all those are still closed. I think people will go running back to those. I also think it will change some of how we practice our spiritual lives and our daily lives for the long term.
Okay, and so how about the place of the church after the pandemic? Now, like in Poland, people stopped going to churches for 3 months. And even before, we were facing a wave of secularization. And now there are many, especially young people, who realize that they can live, let's say, normal life without this, let's say, anachronistic structure called church. So the question is, will they go back to these previous forms of spiritual lives? So this would be one part of the question. And the other would be, how about the social divisions? Like we are, in Poland, we're developing, growing society. There are lots of, differences between people, rich people, poor people, middle class, shrinking middle class. And it seems that the disease pandemic is democratic. I mean, everybody can get it. But then when you take a closer look at it, you realize that people go through it in a different way depending on their economic status, and they prevent themselves in a different ways not to get the disease. So it seems that it's not really democratic. It's really the differences are growing in this strange time. So what do you think about the church and about these social structures or divisions?
I'll answer the social divisions first, and then I'll answer the church question. So the exact situation in Poland is the exact situation in the United States. The coronavirus is affecting people who are poor, who are of ethnic minorities, more than it's affecting people who have some wealth and have the ability to work at home, for example. If you can work at home and you're not around people, then you're not going to get the virus from a coworker who is going home to an apartment, say with several people living in it, or to a very dense neighborhood. And so we think in the United States, that's why the virus is spreading disproportionately amongst people who are poor, who are more at risk for all sorts of problems to begin with. And that's a very hard thing to think about as a pastor. The virus should be democratic and should treat all equally, but it doesn't. So what do we think about that? Because it raises all those old questions about imbalance and inequality in society once again. in terms of this, the first question you asked, church, a really interesting thing at my congregation and at some other congregations, not all, is that we already had a very large online presence as a church. And so once we stopped activities on campus, we put all of our energy into making those better, into making them more accessible, and to teaching people who didn't use them how to use them. And what we've seen is actually an increase in a lot of participation. We've seen whole new models for doing ministry. There's an expression in English, I hope it translates into Polish, that necessity is the mother of invention. Yeah. And we had to make a necessary change, a change that was forced upon us, that has made us learn a lot of new techniques for ministry. So I think we wonder, will people come back when the pandemic is over? But we also don't feel like many of them ever left. They're still with us, just not in the way that we were before the pandemic. And so we think that we will take some of the lessons learned, some of the techniques, some of the activities, online Bible study, morning devotionals over the internet, and we will actually keep them once the pandemic is over, because they have been good ways of ministry for us. The church always runs the risk of being anachronistic, but this time the pandemic has made us be very modern, and we've learned a lot.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Well, when we are talking about pandemic, we mainly think of this COVID disease, but it seems that there are several pandemics that we are somehow facing or combating. One of it, in our context, it might be nationalism. But then we are also watching what is going on in the States. We're following the news about the riots and protests after the death of George Floyd on May 25th in Minneapolis. And some of these riots are peaceful, some of them are very violent, but the scale is overwhelming. Really, there are thousands and thousands of people on the streets, and we can hear the criticism of American government of being ineffective. But then we also see support of the protesters from dozens of countries, including the United Nations and European Union and Amnesty International, African International Organization, Asian international organizations. And these mottos like George Floyd, I can't breathe, Black Lives Matter, they can be here everywhere, not only in the States, but in London, in Brussels, and even in Warsaw. Just a few days ago, I saw this little girl, I should say African Polish girl, and she was holding this banner, just saying, stop calling me Negro, in Polish Murzyn. So it's amazing, really, the scale of this whole thing. So if you could just explain to us what is going on, if you could explain this whole situation to a Polish audience, this would be wonderful.
It would be wonderful. I don't think there's enough time or enough books in the world to explain everything, but I've been thinking about this because I thought you would ask. I think there are three things, at least in the United States, that we have to remember as citizens and as church people. The first is history. History casts long shadows, and my favorite historian in the United States is named John Meacham at Vanderbilt University, and he says that racism is America's original sin. And he's correct. This country has a long legacy, 400 years. The New York Times earlier this year launched what they called the 1619 Project, which was the 400-year legacy of slavery, the enslavement of African people, the bringing of them to the United States, and how that has affected the evolution of our country. And that history is real, and it has created a lot of inequality and mistrust over the years. many people will say, well, we've made progress, and there has been progress made. The civil rights movement of the 1960s was real, but it didn't fix everything. And now all the pieces that were never addressed historically, personally by people, assumptions, their biases, all those things have sort of bubbled to the surface, and it is combined to make a very big social fire, which is the second thing I'd say. Sociologically, I think that social media is very good. I think it can also be used for bad. And I think sometimes it can be used as a tool to expose. And what has happened in the last decade is that so many of the terrible things that were happening to African Americans, people here with black and brown colored skin, people like the little girl in Warsaw with the sign, they weren't seen. And now it is seen. And that made it impossible for people to say, oh, this isn't going on, or that we really are in better shape than the black people, than the brown people, than the African American people are saying that we are. And so when you see something so in front of your eyes, like the death of George Floyd, you can't deny that. You have to say something is wrong here, and something is demanding my attention. What am I going to do or say? And I think a lot of people are becoming aware of how that history, even though it was 400 years ago, affects everyone. And then the last thing I think I want to say as an initial response is that theologically in the church, we have to talk about racism as sin. Racism is a moral problem because any constructs of race are based upon moral evaluations that we have made. And I think people of a certain race are better than people of a second race. In the church, if we're going to follow Jesus, if we're going to be children of God, we have to say, no, that is not correct. God loves diversity. God has created all people in the image of God, which is what it says in the book of Genesis. And so we must reject any form of structural racism and then look within ourselves. What I've been saying to my church is now is the time. It is a time where God is calling us to remember our own stories and our own assumptions about race, and to confess the things we need to confess, and to ask God to transform our hearts so that we can be part of a different future. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if anyone will be able to explain it to you on these interviews because it's a really big problem. Yeah. But those are the three things that I think are important. And I am grateful to God, even though it's difficult, that we have a chance as Christian people and as people in the world to talk about it and maybe to heal some wounds that are that have been hard to heal.
Oh. This is beautiful, really. What how you see that. But my question would be: has not church contributed really in creating this kind of problems and divisions, like nationalism in Poland or racism in the States?
I think any honest answer would be yes. I also think that, maybe because I'm a pastor, I want to give the church some credit. It's not all bad. It's like a coin with two sides. Right? There is a side of the church where the church has done amazing things, feeding the poor, preaching the gospel. In the United States, the Presbyterian Church has founded dozens and dozens of colleges and hospitals where people's minds are educated and their bodies are healed. It was many of those colleges that sent, students down, Presbyterian students down to the American South in the 1860s to teach freed slaves how to read and write for the first time in their life. And so, yes, the church has done many good things. And then you turn the coin over and you recognize that There are many churches that have contributed to the problem, and some would say there are many churches that still are contributing to the problem of ethnocentricity. That would be hard to translate, to sort of racial feelings of racial superiority. They'll say the church has contributed to that problem. Yeah. And so I would say both are true. The fact that the church, justified slavery, the fact that there were pastors in the past who preached in support of segregation of races, that's very hard to say for me, but it is true. And it's only in naming that truth and saying God is asking us to do better, to be better, that we can ever recover from those hard memories.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that these protests will help in healing these wounds, in changing this, the innate problems that you are referring to? What will be the effect of this protest? What do you think?
I think the protest, and I always have to remember that we are Protestants, and the root of that word is protest. And so there is something very important about being followers of God and speaking out for what we believe is right. And that is what the protesters are doing, speaking out for what they believe is right. And really, they have a righteous cause, a very righteous cause. They are asking for justice and for fairness from the state, justice in the way that African American people are treated, and fairness in the way that the state and the criminal justice system treats them. And those are very righteous causes. I think the protests, again, have made it impossible for people to deny. And I think that's important. Some people may have said, I don't want to watch the video of George Floyd. It's too disturbing. But when there's a curfew on your city, and our city in Raleigh, which is a nice city, but it's not particularly big, we had a curfew every night for 5 nights in a row. That hasn't happened since the war years. I mean, It's been forever. And so now life is disrupted on behalf of this righteous cause. And so everyone will have to think about where we'll have to think about what the protest meant and if they agreed or not. And so, yes, the protest will help it have longevity. The real test will be in whether or not there's any real reform, whether or not people take the time to ask how racism has affected their lives, and whether or not the governors and the mayors can help the relationships between the Black community, the African American community, and the police department heal, because right now that is very broken.
Mm-hmm. How do the other communities feel in this context, like Asian communities or Muslim communities or other ethnicities, let's say? I don't know. It's just we're seeing and hearing about the Black Afro-American community. How about the other ethnicities?
So our church, and we are near a large university, North Carolina State University.
Yeah.
And it has a very diverse student population. And our city is very diverse for an American city, particularly a small one. I think that the communities that I'm in contact with, I'm in a prayer group with 2 imams, for example. They are all upset and disturbed and want to see lasting, real change. I think very much to use a term that became famous in Poland, solidarity. They are in solidarity with the people who are asking for fairer justice and for greater respect from police departments. The one exception that I don't know much about in the United States would be the Hispanic community, because so many of them are here without immigration affairs in order.
Yeah.
And so very often they won't speak out. they also, if to back to the pandemic, if they have virus symptoms, they won't go to the hospital because they're afraid of being reported. And this is a big problem because they are a growing population, and we would benefit from knowing what they felt about the protests, but it's very hard to get them to speak. Yeah.
Wow. I remember being in Chicago, in the northern part of the States, and then I remember being in Alabama. And the States is a beautiful, wonderful country, but really being there in the north and in the south, it felt like two different realities, really. So here is my question to you. I mean, I'm looking at your beautiful face. You seem to me pretty white, probably with some Scottish origin.
Yes.
But my question is, what does it mean to be Afro-American in the south of the state?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I can tell you that I have spent most of my adult life reading and listening and trying to learn. I grew up in Louisiana in desegregated schools. So I don't have memories in my mind that many of our older people do, where there was a school for white children and a school for black children. My schools were always together. Okay. And a lot of people, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, they fought for the black children to be in my school, and really they helped me and children like me who were white to learn who African American people were because we were in school with them. All that said, I still don't think I can answer your question very well. I think you'll have to ask someone else. But I have spent my entire life, my entire adult life, reading and trying to learn as much as I can about how their stories are very different than mine, and their experience is different than mine. I'll give you one brief example. There's a man named Tim Scott, who is a senator from South Carolina. And he is a African-American man, a black man, and one of the most powerful men in the world. And he's from South Carolina. I'm from Louisiana. He's only about 5 years older than me. And yet in his first 6 years in Washington as a senator, he was stopped by the police 7 times, simply for driving his car in a neighborhood for no reason, just a check. And in my life, I haven't been stopped by the police 7 times in 48 years.
Wow. And
so it's a different experience, and I'm not sure I understand all the differences. I'm trying. I think it's very hard, and that is heartbreaking to me.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, I have been many times in the States, and many times I thought we all feel the same, but now I realize it's not the case. And I think it's a different world and different reality.
The United States, to your original opening statement, is very contextual.
Yeah.
Right? North Carolina, where I live, is very different than California, even though there are mountains and rivers, and there you can ski in the wintertime in both states, and we both have beaches, but they're very different. Chicago is different than Alabama. You are correct, my friend. That is absolutely true.
Yeah.
But I think as a Christian, I believe that, and as a pastor, I believe, and as a pastor who has friends who are pastors all over the United States, I believe that these times of great trial can become opportunities for great growth.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that everywhere will grow, but some places will. And that long moral arc of the universe that Martin Luther King talked about it has a chance to come a little closer if we listen and if we pray and if we choose to follow the best lessons of God, which are trying to love one another as God has loved us. And if we can do some of that, even in the midst of all the craziness and the pain, then we have a chance to be part of justice in the world. And that is something that we must thank God for if we have a chance to be a part of some new life and new things.
Yeah, yeah. You're a wonderful pastor. I have seen you many times preaching and ministering and serving people, and you really have this wonderful open heart for all type of people, even Polish people, which is really amazing. And I have seen you many times being tired and really exhausted, and I think it's a difficult ministry. But let's imagine that you can face this 6-year-old daughter of George Floyd. What could you tell her now in this context?
That's a very hard question. I think I would start by listening, and then I would try to pray. And then I would say to her that losing a father is one of life's hardest experiences, most difficult experiences. And she is far too young to have lost her father, but that he was loved by many people, and that her father's life and the people that he touched and the witness to his death may be a way for new things to happen in the world, and that people will always remember his name. I think I would be very gentle with that question, with that child. I'd answer it different if the child was 16 maybe or 25, but 6 years old is awfully little. But that's a start.
Yeah. Thank you. This would be an impossible situation for me. So I realize it's a hard question, but a real one. Is there anything that you would like to say to our students or the Polish audience, or those who are listening to us now?
So we were in Poland in the summer of 2018, my family and myself. And the children ask me all the time, Dad, when can we go back to Poland? Dad, when can we go back to Poland? Because the welcome of everyone we saw was so amazing. And the land and the people were so beautiful to us. It was just a wonderful time to be in Poland in the summer months. And my children very much want to come back. And we hope to be able to do so someday. I am so proud to be a pastor in a church that supports the work of the seminary. And I'm proud to call you and many of the faculty and the staff my friends. And we are just always amazed at the work that you are able to do, even in the pandemic, as the seminary community. And we constantly are praying and giving thanks to God for the EWST group and community. So thank you so much. And it's been wonderful to be with you and to see you, my friend. And blessings to you and your family and to EWST.
Thank you very much. You're my hero, really, and my friend. And when the pandemic is over, your place is here. Thank you very much for agreeing for this conversation. It's been a pleasure. It's always good talking to you, my friend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wojciech.